Ouyang, Zhan, an Allegory. Peach and plum have wonderful wood, ailanthus and chestnut oak, with no marvellous form. All owe fertility to the felicitous clouds, with the same spring wind to blow on them. The beautiful and the ugly, if they are really no different, all are bustling about in vain. To become a ground councillor or a general depends on the Creator. For now, goblet in hand, I might as well get drunk. Okay, so Ouyang, Zhan, Zhu Xingqiu, living from approximately 755 to 800, is a mid-Tang poet. In fact, he was quite closely related to Han Yu and his circle. Another peculiarity of his is that he came from the area of Fujian, of modern Fujian, Min in Tang times, in the southeastern coast of China, which, like the extreme south of China at this time, the area of modern Guangdong, were, partially Sinicized, semi-barbarian areas. I mean, Ouyang Zhang is probably one of the first persons of distinction to come from the region of Min and to pass the Jinshi examination. So, as we said, he passed the Jinshi in 792, which was a very special year. The same year that Han Yu and Li Guan passed that exam, and also two future ground councillors, Sui Chun and Li Jiang. This examination became, proverbial in Chinese tradition. It's called the Long Hu Bang, the Dragon and Tiger List. So in spite of his promise, Ouyang Zhan didn't really accomplish much in positions. He stayed in and out of the capital for some time, tried to pass some extra examinations, which he failed. And I think finally in 798 he did pass a placement examination, and he got a position at one of the universities in the capital, what's it called, the instructor in the School of the Four Gates in the Directorate of Education. In that position, he was able to become, very briefly, a patron of Han Yu. To him, he gave a position as a teacher in the university, as erudite there. But he died shortly after, in 800. So Han Yu, for example, praised Ouyang Zhan for his ancient style prose, and he has some pieces that have been preserved that are interesting, it seems. As for his poetry, he has a reputation of being particularly good at portraying sadness, and the poem that we've read today is no exception to this. Aptly titled Yu Xing, that is an allegory, this poem of his, which is a pentasyllabic Liu Xi, I think, is a good example of the very typical sort of poem of complaint. Remember, scholar officials from Chu Yuan onwards always like to paint themselves, when they are not successful in office, as worthy people that, either because of slander among the circles of power or because of the emperor's lack of discernment, are not given high positions in office. This becomes, a very common trope. You will find almost every Tang poet making poems under this persona of the rejected scholar. One can't sound too direct or too frank, so this poem tries to couch this complaint at lack of recognition, at lack of a good official career, by talking in very generic terms about how cosmos, how the whole world is unfair, how the virtuous and the less virtuous, the able and the less able, get commingled. That's all our bustling about is in vain if this just depends on the whims of a creator or of fate. But the last line, very typical. So faced with the uncaring amorality of the cosmos, well, one just can find some surcease of sorrow in drinking and in friendship and in the polite aesthetic pursuits that a scholar official would engage in. But, even though it's couched in those terms, there's, I think there's a very clear implicit criticism of the emperor and of the system for not having promoted him. And there's this dressing oneself in the robes of the virtuous, the meritorious, as opposed to the others. That would be the general theme of the poem, and we can break it down couplet by couplet as we usually do. So the poem is titled An Allegory, and that comes from the first couplet. Peach and plum have wonderful wood, ailanthus and chestnut oak, with no marvelous form. So there is a contrast. This is a very stereotypical view that peaches and plums are wonderful trees. They have beautiful flowers. They give fruit. They are, even long before Ouyang, they are metaphors for virtuous people. As opposed to them, we have the ailanthus and the chestnut oak, which are presumably very bad trees. Nothing good is gotten out of these two. So there's this distinction. There's the virtuous, the good trees, and then there's the not so virtuous trees, not so good trees, which obviously maps out to people. Like there's the virtuous, good, moral, intellectually and ethically cultivated, who should rule, and the Confucian ideology, and then there are the others that are glib speakers, flatterers, or just curry the ruler's favor. Second couplet. All owe fertility to the felicitous clouds, with the same spring wind to blow on them. So, these trees grow in nature. Nature makes no distinctions. It doesn't privilege peaches and plums because they're useful to humans over and above any other plants. The same spring wind blows and brings green leaves to all the trees. Here, the spring wind blowing and the felicitous clouds seem to me very clearly to be stand-ins for imperial patronage, imperial protection, like the emperor is like this spring wind that can make the trees flourish, that can make the scholar officials climb the ladder of the cursus honorum of a Chinese scholar official. So the emperor blows all his magnanimity on all of them, but some get more of the magnanimity than others. Yeah. Third couplet. The beautiful and the ugly, if they are no different, all are bustling about in vain. So here's the gist of the criticism. Like, if distinctions are not made, if beautiful and ugly, in the case of trees, virtuous, able, and non-virtuous, non-able, if these distinctions are not really made by the sovereign, well, you could say there's no point in being virtuous or cultivated because, it's just sycophancy which gets you to climb in the ranks. And finally, the last couplet makes this pretty explicit. To become a ground councillor or a general depends on the creator. For now, goblet in hand, I might as well get drunk. More than on a creator, maybe Tian, heaven, whether an anthropomorphized or non-anthropomorphized entity, success very clearly depends on the emperor's goodwill in this autocratic society. But of course, Ouyang can't be too explicit. So, he's saying here, fate seems to determine whether one succeeds or whether one doesn't. And when one doesn't, what remains? Well, one can at least take a cup of wine and enjoy himself and free oneself from the dust of the world. So overall, in the translation, it doesn't look like a Liu Xi, because I would expect the second and third couplets to be parallelistic, and they don't feel parallelistic in the translation. So maybe, even though it's 8 lines of pentasyllabic lines, pentasyllabic verse, maybe this is not a Liu Xi. But anyway, it is a very good and very representative example of the sort of poetry that scholar officials really like to engage in.